everybody. You're very welcome to our Connected Tech seminar series. So for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be focusing on emerging technology. So each Friday at 3 p.m., we'll be joined by an expert speaker on a variety of topics, including data analytics, today, Internet of Things, blockchain, AI, AR, and VR. So I would encourage you to join as many of these seminars as you can. And the Connected Tech series is one of 3 pillars for our wider Connected seminar series. The other 2 are Connected Globe and also Connected Planet, which focuses on sustainability. And the Connected series is designed really to bring experts together to discuss the key trends and the key challenges faced by industry and by wider society with our postgraduate network of postgraduate students and alumni. And there's some really interesting topics and there's some great guests. So keep an eye out for upcoming events. And we're delighted today to be joined by Martin Graham, an alumni of our Masters in Digital Marketing and Analytics. And Martin is the Insights and Analytics Directors at Virgin Media. And to date, he's had a really impressive career working with a variety of companies in the area of data analytics. So we're really grateful that you've joined us today to share your insights on data and analytics, which of course underpins emerging technologies. So I'm going to pass over to Martin now, and I would just encourage you guys, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on the chat. And also then at the end, if you have questions and you want to turn on your mic, we'll have some time for some questions and answers.
Sure. Thanks very much, Lorraine, for the invitation. If you could just give me a little nod that you can hear me still well enough. Brilliant. Okay. So thanks first of all, Lorraine, and to everybody there for the opportunity to come and speak to the group. Hopefully, there's a little bit of relevance to what we'll talk about in the area of analytics. But I suppose to start off with, I always feel like I have to give some justification for beyond Lorraine's wonderful introduction, because she has to be nice to me, to who I am and why you might listen to me. And I guess probably because I've spent an awful long time making the mistakes that a lot of people make as we kind of build out in these areas, and have a lot of the scars of the the various projects and things that I've worked on. But I started out my career in this area towards the end of the 90s with a small company called America Online. Anybody under, what I've found is that anybody we speak to now under the age of 35 or so kind of shrugs their shoulders and isn't sure. But there was a time when AOL was the largest internet company in the world. Was part of the largest corporate merger in history at the time, when it bought Time Warner for $125 billion. So that kind of merger, it was a little bit ahead of its time, where an access company provider was buying content on that kind of mass scale. But it's interesting that 20 plus years later, what we're seeing now is that real kind of convergence of content and access provision. I moved on from there to O2, so I spent about 5 years of my career working with O2 in Ireland. And other than brands that you don't hear about anymore, there's probably a good story in O2, and that we would have had a fairly cutting edge view of data and analytics at the time, and really far ahead of its time. Lots of great experience. Moved on from there to permanent TSB for a few years, so a bit of experience in the retail banking world, the corporate banking world as well with Deutsche Bank. I've been working with TU Dublin for about 5-6 years now, lecturing or speaking on a variety of courses. And as Lorraine said there, I'm currently the Insight Analytics Director for Virgin Media. So I finally managed to break my weird statistical outlier of an affinity for blue logos and companies, right? So we've managed to get away from that. A little kind of starting point in this, right? So there's an interesting kind of topic here around where are we going and the progress and things that's been made in data analytics. So I had my first data mining project, right? And what we used to call it at the time, you'll now hear it called machine learning, AI, predictive analytics, advanced analytics. We've gone through a lot of different names. But about 17, 18 years ago, as a young kind of analyst, we had lots of funding provided by a parent company in the US that said, this is the new thing, start doing it. We had lots of excited executives We had no particular goal, we had no particular plan. We didn't know what we were going to do with it when we found anything. So we just got data and started pumping it through the process, and we deployed nothing. All right, so we brought nothing out of it. Now we did manage to derive a considerable amount of business value later on when we figured out what was wrong with the project. But at the start, we managed to spend probably about €500,000 of or pounds as it would have been at the time, of the company's money without really delivering anything. 17 years later, we have more compute power, we've more data, we've more funding, we've more data scientists. We're doing this in much more industries. There are far more applications. There's more tools to help us. The body of knowledge has grown enormously. And last year, Gartner said that 80% of data science projects are going to fail. And they said it'll be because they don't have clear goals, they don't have a technology strategy for deployment, and they don't really have business buy-in, i.e. a plan. So the question is, if we've had all of this advancement over the course of the last 17 years, how is it that we're still repeating these types of mistakes? And why is it that so many projects don't quite get to deliver in the way that they should, when the capability that's there at this stage is really, really incredible? And there are a bunch of reasons for this. Some of them start on the analytics side, as I might call it, the supply side of this particular equation. So we talk about this focus on technology, and I know I'm aware, I suppose, that the theme of what we're talking about here is kind of emerging technologies. One of the things that we really have to watch out for in this world when we're setting out to run analytical projects is not to allow the technology to become the purpose of the project, and not to allow the technology function to drive the agenda when it comes to what we want to do. And this is something that I've seen, in one organization after another, and not just the ones that I've worked in, but I'm fortunate enough to get to connect with a lot of people across industry in a lot of different companies. And big themes that we've had, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, where we've had the so-called big data revolution, we've really got into the idea of getting all of these, very, very fancy technologies, stitching them together, lots of work for lots of engineers and lots of consultancies. And we arrive at the end, having spent an awful lot of money and looking for a use case, for the technologies. So we want to try to avoid that. We also want to try to avoid the kind of frustrated genius of an analytics leader who, kind of is really trying to drive things forward, but has a difficulty with communicating or difficulty with getting the message across into the specific business area. And that can be something that holds companies back as well. Our lab technician here is kind of representing our challenge at the moment in this area, with the kind of building out of large centers of excellence in a lot of the bigger companies, which absolutely is a wonderful thing to do. But we've got to be very mindful that that center of excellence needs to be very, very well plugged in to the rest of the organization in order to avoid becoming, an R&D space that's populated with people who are, doing lots and lots of really clever work, but without necessarily returning value back to the organization that they're working in. And then the fourth area here that I just kind of call out is not to get too obsessed with the data. I think another kind of thing that we've come through that I'm seeing the analytics community pivot a little bit back from again is the idea that we need to get all of the data, we need to get it all into the one place, and we need to have these huge platforms that are going to process everything in real time and stream it from place A to place B. And again, the theme across all four of these things is they're things that distract analytics teams, data engineering teams, technology teams away from the reason why they've started to build these things out in the first place, which has all got to connect back to business value. On the flip side, on the demand side, we equally have a set of challenges. So coming from the stakeholder side, and focused on four different areas here again, right? One of the biggest things that holds back this kind of data-driven economy that we've been talking about for a while now is human beings. And I don't mean this to sound in a terrible way. We had a great speaker at the Analytics Institute's conference a couple of years ago from the world of Formula One, who spoke about the drive towards perfection. And I'm sure people have watched the documentaries on Netflix, and, they're kind of trying to achieve that extra 0.1 or 0.01 of a second in performance. And his perspective on stage and afterwards was that the biggest point of failure in a Formula One team that still remains is the driver. And really, if it weren't for the drivers, the teams would actually now be able to perfect the art of getting the car to go around the track in the fastest possible time. But complained that the authorities for Formula One won't consider it a sport anymore if they don't have the driver in there. So they have to keep them in, unfortunately. But for us, what we've got to think about is, how do we break through the difference between beliefs and the truth, right? The specific area of a stakeholder or a marketeer or a business person who has a particular path that they want to follow and is looking for information that's going to support it. And it's a very natural human thing. We all do it. No matter how objective we think we are, we reject information at the first look that doesn't agree with the thing that we already believe. So how do we need to get better at communicating, or how do we need to get better at training people to consume information in such a way that they're able to stand back from it a little bit and to become a little bit more objective? We also have what I refer to as the number fishers. The stakeholders who will look to accumulate a set of numbers so that they can kind of dip in and out as they need them in order to back up whatever piece of information it is that they're looking to do. And again, it's a similar kind of thread. We've the storytellers, the people who'd love to keep the analytics teams and the business intelligence teams very busy, providing them with anecdotes and stories and things that they can use in presentations, but again, without necessarily having that real drive to deliver business value. And then our last little group here is what I call the beautiful minds, the stakeholders who want to collect all the data themselves and do the analysis. And we love those guys because they do the work for us, right? But sometimes it might be better to allow the folks that are trained in that area to help you to do it, rather than trying to accumulate the data and do it. And again, what can happen with the disconnect between these things is where the technology team or the analytics team has become too focused on the platforms, too focused on getting the data in and the tools, and the business teams are still in this mindset where we're not quite plugging the two areas in together. We get a lovely disconnect where we've invested in all of the technology we need, all of the tools we need, and all of the skills we need, and the analysis gets done on a spreadsheet in Excel by a person who has never gone to a statistics class or or trained in this particular area. And it's not that one person knows better than the other. It's just that we need to be able to find a way of getting these groups to break through that organizational boundary and actually do the work together. I have completely and unashamedly stolen the next two slides from a presentation that I saw this morning. So the credit goes to Jen Walsh of Zenith and Core Media for these two. But I just found them really interesting illustrations of what we've just talked about. So this chart is about data that's really interesting, but isn't particularly useful unless you're in a very specific area. These are search trends in the US on the day of a solar eclipse. I think based in the locality of New York. And what you see on the blue line right up till 1240-ish, which is when the eclipse happened, the Google searches were focused on solar eclipse. And as soon as that had happened, the search popularity of My Eyes Hurt surged up and the solar eclipse dripped away, right? So really interesting and a bit of fun, right? But not really what we're, not really adding that much value, but interesting nonetheless. The other piece, and this comes back to the kind of stakeholder belief. So here we're looking at the correlation, or over like a 2-time series, for the amount of mozzarella cheese consumed by students and the number of doctorates awarded in civil engineering over the course of the same period. And if we weren't, trained to question things, right? Like this isn't statistically, there's a relationship there, right? We can all see it. So we need to be trained in critical thinking, not just statistics, to be able to say, well, look, I don't necessarily believe that if I start eating more cheese, that I'm going to be awarded a doctorate spontaneously. And as Jen said this morning, I have been eating the cheese and I haven't got the doctorate. So I've got some evidence to the contrary. So the point is, on this particular one, we'll find if we want to see something, and we work hard enough with the data, we'll find something that will support it, right? The challenge is becoming objective and being able to approach it in such a way that our effort is actually to disprove the thing that we already believe rather than to prove it. And the kind of scientists and the academics amongst the audience might immediately recognize what that is, right? It's the concept of the null hypothesis of, can I disprove this thing that I believe, or is there evidence to suggest that I might be wrong? And that's where the learning comes from, and that's where our direction, our ability to point an organization and teams and so on in the right direction will come from. So this is the only animation I think I have on this slide. It was a bad choice at the last minute. So look, what we're talking about here is engagement, right? So in some way or other, like each one of the things I've just talked about comes down to getting teams of people to work together, right? And comes down to getting that engagement and getting the right working model in place. And this is something that I think needs to be new. And I think it's, it almost call it out as a challenge to the universities and a challenge to the industry to say, as somebody who's been in this for a long time, I don't believe that data science is living up to its promise. And I definitely don't believe that it's living up to its promise in smaller organizations. I think we all can pull together the strong examples from the big tech companies, and we could walk around Grand Canal Dock and we'll find 100 people who can give us 100 brilliant projects in half an hour. But wander over the other side of the city and talk to some SME owners or to some, companies in the 300 to 500 region people and ask them how that's going for them, and we get very different answers. So I think there's a new way of training people, and I think there's a new way of working that we need to start thinking about. It's going to become, ever more important, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to do a little exercise first, and I hope this will work for us. So I'm going to give you an example of a decision that we want to support through analytics, right? And for those of you that are ahead of the game, the URL down in the bottom left-hand corner here is actually going to let you log on to a site and answer question number 2 for us. And it will also allow you to upvote or downvote the questions that other people are submitting. And I hope it's up and working, but we'll get to that and we'll fix it in a second if we can't. But first, the scenario. So we're standing in a supermarket. Our arms are full of items for a party back at the office. Our objective is to get out of the supermarket in the shortest time, right? So we're late for a meeting with the boss. There are 10 tills in front of us to choose from, and we have access to an analyst to help us, right? So to first think yourself, how would you intuitively deal with this situation if you were standing in the supermarket? But then I want you to go onto that URL and answer question number 2. Feel free to put in several answers if you want, and we'll have a little look at what's coming through in a second. So hopefully everybody will be able to get on. Easy enough. I'm going to check it myself as well at the same time, just to be sure. Okay, I hope that's working for people. I'm going to go flip across to the responses coming in. Okay, great. We've got a couple of them starting to come in there. The URL is still there for anybody who didn't quite get onto it yet. And please upvote and downvote as you see fit for anything that anybody else has put in. Okay, so how many people are waiting at each till? What's the number of people in each queue? The top ones. How many items can a teller process in a set time? Which queue has the least items per person? How many items in the trolleys or baskets? Okay, how many items have these people got on the belt? So we'll keep seeing some come through there. So which queue has the least items per person is doing very well, very popular. Okay. How many people are waiting at each till? So we've got a little pattern showing there, right? And I think it's all kind of pointing in the same direction. Intuitively, I think what we do is one of two or three things in this particular scenario. We either go to the queue that has the shortest distance between the till and the last person, right? That's probably our quickest heuristic. We might count the number of people in the queue and realize, well, actually those people are standing slightly farther apart, so I'll go to the one with the fewest people. If we're even more observant, as we've got up here, we might start looking at the number of items that each of those people has. We might even observe the speed of the checkout people. But there's a couple of things to kind of note for us on this. I'm just going to flip back to the to our presentation. So first of all, just to throw this up, these numbers changed yesterday because we were doing this with a class, but I'll have to update them. So I've asked this question over the last 4 years to 118 undergrad students, 76 postgraduate students. We've come up with 81 unique bits of data that we could go and look for. And only once has a marketing student said, I'd ask the analyst which queue I should stand in, right? So, and we've just kind of gone through the same thing. We've gone through exactly the same process. Like our instinct as a group of people in business, right, isn't to ask for the question to be answered. It's to ask for the information that we need to answer the question. So what it challenges us to ask for ourselves is, why are we paying these data scientists, or whatever we want to refer to them, six-figure salaries, to just go into a database, take data out of it and give it to us so that we can analyze it ourselves? Right. And this is a really kind of interesting little research thing for me, because it just repeats itself over and over again. And we've seen exactly the same. So don't feel bad. I've probably phrased the question in a particular way to get the response that I want. But just be aware, I suppose, like when we go to engage with this area, all of us, every single one of us, has that instinct to put our hand on the wheel and try and drive the car, where really what we should be doing is asking the expert to do it for us. So effective analysis, I'm going to say, is it starts and ends with this idea of business value, right? And that's really a message for the analysts out there, right? It doesn't start with technology. It doesn't start with data. It starts with business value, right? It needs sales and marketing and product teams to lead analytical projects, right? And that's a real challenge to the analyst community, right? Is to go, well, I'm going to really engage with these people and say, what is it? Like, what does that mean? What does business value mean for our organization? And whether it's planning an advertising project or any other business project that's in there, it starts with, what are we trying to achieve with a business, as a business? And the thing that we continuously have to kind of, again, and organization after organization, class after class, have to repeatedly kind of go back to people and say, like, to know something, to understand something, or to explain something, unless you're a researcher, is not an objective. It's not a business objective. It's not the purpose of what we're doing. And that leads us on to this kind of simple, well, probably maybe overly simplistic, but it seems to work idea. How many ways are there to grow revenue in a business, right? And we won't kind of go through the process again of asking everybody to list them out, because actually there's only 4, right? You either need to add more customers to the pot, which you can only do by acquiring more customers, or stopping customers from leaving you, or stopping customers from reducing the amount that they're going to buy. And there are only 2 ways to acquire them. You either acquire them, people who don't currently shop in your category, or you acquire somebody else's customer from them and win them across. Or you introduce your existing customers to new categories, right? So can I sell another product to an existing customer? Or I get an existing customer who's already buying a product to buy more of it. Or I somehow earn the right to charge a premium for my product in the category over somebody else. And again, we've kind of spent 5 or 6 years around about this model, and nobody has yet come back to me with another answer to this, except for accountants. Accountants will tell you that you can also grow the business by reducing costs, but nobody wants to talk about that for too long. But honestly, though, we can do that. We can't grow revenues in the business without hitting one of these 4 areas. So the example I often talk through with people in this is, if you were working in Colgate and you wanted to grow revenue, you only have a small number of options, right? So you can get more customers by convincing people who don't brush their teeth at the moment to start brushing their teeth, and you should naturally pick up a bit of share. You can convince somebody who does brush their teeth with Crest to start using Colgate instead, or you can get somebody who's about to switch in the opposite direction to not switch. That'll grow your customer base and grow your revenues as a result. or you can cross-sell them something else, create a new category. This particular industry is great for this. So, adding in the dental floss, adding in the mouthwash, adding in the super mouthwash, adding the mouthwash before the brushing the teeth, and the mouthwash and brushing the teeth, and the electric toothbrushes and everything else. Or you can try to grow consumption, right? So you can try to increase the amount of toothpaste that somebody's going to use in a day. So how could you do that? You can either convince them, you can move from telling them that they have to brush their teeth every day to they have to do it twice a day, to it should be after every meal, to it should be after every meal and every cup of coffee. Or more simply, as I believe is the case, you can just show the person in the ad using 4 times as much toothpaste as they actually should, right? And all of a sudden you've got a load of it going to waste. Or you can charge a premium, right? Whitening products, sensitivity products, all of these things. Like that world of FMCG is brilliant at creating new reasons why their old product is actually inferior to this new one that they've just come up with last week. Okay, but these genuinely are these are the areas that create business value within an organization. There's very little else, and very few people working in an analytics function are hugely consumed or work thinking about these areas. So if we're talking about growing business and we're talking about marketing to a degree, and we're agreeing that those are the only ways that we're able to grow revenues, well, then there's a very small number of simple questions that we need to know the answer to in order to be able to do that. Because that means that marketing will all come down to trying to influence the behavior of a consumer or a business or somebody who's going to buy within the particular category. So the first job of analytics really in an organization isn't to build predictive models, and it's not to do some kind of real-time processing or natural language or deep learning out of images or whatever else. To start off from here, understanding value of whose behavior are we trying to influence? So who's the customer we're trying to hit here, right? And that's, go back to the Colgate example. If I'm trying to get somebody who doesn't brush their teeth to brush their teeth, or I'm trying to get somebody who brushes their teeth but uses Crest to start using Colgate, what I will do next is entirely different based on which of those two things I need to do. So the first job of analytics or analysis is identifying where's the opportunity for us in those two areas. Is it one or the other, both or neither? And once I understand who it is that I'm trying to influence, I need to understand to a degree, what are they doing today? And this is where the data analysis starts to come into its own, right? Because we get to a point where we can really start to describe behavior, the timing of behavior, the triggers, the causes in really deep ways. And that gives us the opportunity to understand how are we going to get them to do what we need to do in the future. Okay. And then the softer element of it, the piece where we kind of have to move a little bit away from the data, is when we try to understand, well, why are they doing it, right? And I don't just mean when are they doing it. Data analytics is great at coming up with timing for things. So this customer leaves when their offer expires, right? But that's when, it's not why, right? So what was it that motivated that person to want to go and seek a better deal, right? Because they didn't just do it. It wasn't just the change that happened. It wasn't just the trigger. And marketing analytics, therefore, is all about becoming more effective or more efficient in the investments of time and effort that we put in. Where are we going to put our resources? And we do that by answering these questions and allowing ourselves to be more focused. So we try to use this model as much as we possibly can. And the key to this is everything in the top left-hand side. This is there's many different models. This isn't the only one. Not suggesting that anybody necessarily adopts it, but have something that keeps a framework around how you start these projects. And it starts over on the left-hand side with understanding what the situation is, but brings us through an iterative discussion between an analyst and a business stakeholder in these two areas here. What are we trying to achieve as a business? And therefore, what does the analysis need to achieve? And researchers might recognize this as an overall objective of what I want to do and defining a research question. But it's a very, very similar structure. And before we go near what data are we going to go and collect, gather, process, analyze, try to structure, put into information, we need to start with those areas in order to understand that the effort that we're putting in is actually going to result in an action. Because there's so many, I think the latest figure was 87%, and I don't know how they do this, but Gartner had, of business insights are not acted on, right? And that's an unbelievable statistic to me, right? So, and I say unbelievable, it's actually mildly is unbelievable, right? Because I question whether they are business insights if they're not acted upon, right? So how is it that we've got all of this information sitting around in our businesses, all of these really key insights, and nobody's doing anything with them? And I think it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of were we looking to try to answer the right question in the first place? And if we weren't trying to answer the right question, I doubt that it could genuinely be an insight because it's not actionable. But on the flip side, are we still as organizations behaving in the way that we have a determined path that we want to take? And we want to be more data driven. So we know we should ask for some data to support it. And we know that that helps when we sit in the boardroom and talk to the CFO or talk to the CEO about how we want to spend the company's money. But is it really driving the business need, right? And are we really answering the right question? And I hope not to bore people now, but I do want to just kind of very briefly take this through a real life example from not an organization that I was working in myself, but an organization that an analyst that I had a mentoring relationship was working in, and that they struggled with, just to hopefully illustrate the different way that this sets off an analytical project. So it starts out with an insurance company marketing manager posing the question to the analytics team of what are the characteristics of our stickiest customers, right? And now many people might say, what do you mean by stickiest? Which is a great question, exactly the question that the analyst should have asked, right? But stickiest in this world, in the world of services, utilities, insurance companies, means customers who don't leave, right? Customers who stay from one year to the next, right? And they're not leaving to go and move their business off to another organization. So in this case, our analytics team took the brief, had a look. Let's identify who are the customers who don't leave for another provider. And they came up with this histogram of the customer base for the insurance company, car insurance in this particular case. And they found that if they look at the years of tenure, so in other words, how many years have these customers been with us without moving their business somewhere else? And they found this distribution, nice little normal distribution with a little bit of space over here to the right, where we have this group of customers, about 14% of the customer base, I think, who have been around for 17 years or more. So they begin to write up their nice little report that says, wonderful, we found this group of very sticky customers, boss. 14% of the base, looks like it's big, very addressable. And here's the description of them. They're older, they drive bigger cars, or say they're bigger and more expensive cars. They're homeowners, they're often retired, they tend to buy comprehensive insurance, and they tend to have multiple policies in the household, right? And what we've actually found in here, right, because we started off without questioning the question, is people who've been driving cars for 17 years or more, right? Because nobody in this particular cohort could possibly be under 34. They're probably at least 45. And what we've done is ruled young people out of the question. Now, it got caught in time, but the consequence would have been a lovely big marketing campaign launched to try to get these people to join because we think that they're not going to leave. All right. So a relatively simple bit of engagement here. And again, I hope I'm not boring people too much, but I think this is where this is the crux moment, right? What are the characteristics of our stickiest customers? The first question up here should be the most asked question in any company by any analytics team. Why do you want to know, right? And at the moment, what we see generally, again, across industry is that this question is both badly posed and badly received. So why do you want to know? Why are you questioning why I want to know? Right. And the reason I say it's badly posed is that if the response it elicits is, I think that you're questioning whether I know what I'm doing, rather than I believe that you're trying to help me do better, then something is really wrong in that space. The second most asked question that we should have is, what are you going to do with the answer? Right. So one of the things that I've very rarely seen in this space is where teams are willing to sit down together and scenario plan what they're going to do with the answer to a question before they put any effort into answering it. So if the answer I came back to you looked like this, what would you do? Right? If it looked like this, what would you do? And quite often what we find is that the response will be, well, I can't answer that until I see the answer. But that's not correct, right? There are only a finite number of high level categories that answer could fall into. And if we haven't already thought that through of if the answer is this, my plan is going to be A or my plan is going to be B, this is where we end up with 85% of the work having no action behind it. Because by the time that's answered, the particular business area has possibly moved on. One of the things that we didn't talk about standing back in the supermarket while we were deciding on all of the different data points that we'd like to gather was it could easily take longer just to gather that information than it would have taken us to stand in the slowest queue, right? And we never considered that, right? So one of the things that we never asked was, well, actually, the slowest queue here was going to take 10 minutes max, right? Do we think we're going to get a better answer in 10 minutes, or should we just randomly guess? Right, and there is a space for that. You know, we need to keep those things. We need to keep those things in mind. The other thing that we never pause to stop and say, and we do this normally with the students when we do it, just as a bit of fun. If we go right back to the objective, our objective, as we stated within there, was to get out of the supermarket as fast as we can. We never actually said you had to bring the items back to the office. So the real answer, or the correct answer to the question, was put everything down and walk out the door. Okay. So again, like that, you know, obviously in a real world scenario, that's unlikely to come up. So the answer to these two questions in this instance was, because we're losing too many of our new customers after 1 year or 2 years, and I want to acquire more customers who are like the stickiest ones. And I'm going to focus our acquisition on those types of customers, right? Now, what that does completely changes the context of the question that we're asking, right? Just that 5 minutes of a conversation. You don't need to know what they look like now. You need to know what they look like when we acquired them, right? That's first number one, right? You can't acquire somebody who stays for 17 years after they joined you. Also, you don't necessarily need the stickiest ones as such. You really just need ones that are going to stay around longer than the ones we have today, right? So they don't have to be the absolute most likely to stay. They just have to be more likely to stay than the ones we have. And when we restate that in the structure that we just looked at up above, we just get this very simple, clear picture that comes from the same amount of information and has taken about 15 minutes to get there. We're observing that we're observing that a high proportion of our customers don't stay beyond 2 years. So what are we trying to do? We're going to increase the proportion of newly acquired customers who stay at least 3 years from 15% to 25, and for 5 years from 10 to 20. And that's going to make our market share grow by 3 points in the next 12 months, right? We don't need very much data to be able to come up with that. So our analytical objective, where we're actually going to dive in, is we're going to define what characteristics differentiated customers who stayed at least 5 years after acquisition from those who left in the first 3 years. So we're going to find those two cohorts of customers, and we're going to start looking for signals in the data to tell us what's the difference between those two people. We're going to try to understand what was the difference in the behavior of those two people in the first year. So things like, did they phone up looking for quotes? Did they have a claim? Did they, you know, what happened within that first year that could have told us that an intervention was needed with one of those groups of customers and not with the other? And we're going to quantify the number of customers that we need to actually achieve in order to hit those ratios and percentages that we talked about up above. Now, that analytical objective has a chance of being acted on. It won't definitely be acted on, but it has a chance. The first one that we did, we would have tied up a couple of very expensive people for quite a long time, and we might have got a couple of slides out of it at the end. And as happens in industry all too often, we all would have agreed that it was a great piece of work and gone back to our desks and done nothing, because we all realized that it wasn't really a great piece of work, but we don't really want to deal with the underlying problem. So where does that leave us? If I can find my button again. So this little Venn diagram has been knocking around for an enormous amount of time, and every time I still see it in a presentation that you know, we'd see at one of these things, it makes me shudder a little bit, right? So we talked for, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years about this data scientist, the data scientist that was going to be there, that was, you know, 1/3 a statistician, 1/3 a computer programmer, a hacker, a coder, 1/3 a marketeer, or a manufacturing expert or whatever. And they don't exist, and they're never going to exist. So we need to stop looking for them. You know, honestly, I've been doing this, I think I said, like, for the best part of 20 years, I've never met one. And if I have met one, they're now the director of something in a big consultancy. They're definitely not doing this work, right? So if anybody's lucky enough to find one, I would love to see it, or them, and please send me a photograph. But they're not there. So we need to move to this idea of squads or teams, or, you know, how do we get these things together? And what we've tried to represent here in this slide is that we need to get people working together. We need to get the substance expert, the subject matter expert, working with the statistician or working with the data engineer, to be able to bring that thing together, focus it in correctly, like genuinely collaborate with each other, right? Not person A writes a brief for person B. Like, if I, you know, any organization that I find that, you know, these projects get kicked off by one person writing a document and sending it to an anonymous mailbox for another person to pick up. Like, this is the ways of working that we've set out for these teams, and it doesn't work. Like, it consistently doesn't work, but we keep doing it and we keep doing it and we keep doing it. So if I was to kind of to move towards, I'm missing a word off this line. Apologies, Lorraine. I must fill in the rest of the titles, but we'll see what it is at the end when we're finished. You know, if I was to kind of talk about like across these three areas, and if somebody was saying like, look, I'm setting out data analytics tomorrow, what do you think I should be focusing on? Yes, we need really good governance, and governance is becoming more and more important as we move to cloud-based technologies, and we all start to adopt these things of not having our data on premise. And you know, there's significant governance challenges that presents to us, particularly from like the European Union privacy legislation, and the impact of having a data environment that you own in a cloud that may be in Dublin, but some of the engineering is being supported from outside of the EEA. That's a whole new area that we need to figure out. What's the governance model around that? So if an engineer outside the EEA is able to access that environment, does that constitute a transfer of the data out, which, you know, the legislation is leaning towards? Yes, it does. So we're going to have to really look at new governance. It's very, very important. But we need to start thinking about governance as an enabler function, not as a control function. So some of the things that are happening there, absolutely there's an element of control. So I think like lawyers would be shuddering all over the place when I say that. But we need to start setting it up as a way that it sets the path for us to do these things, rather than asks us the path that we want to follow and tells us why it's wrong, right? So that's something that needs to shift within the area. Engineering needs to be seen as an efficiency builder, right? There are things that we want to do, tools, engineering, processing capability, storage capability, just to allow us to do it with less effort, right? So figuring out what are the things we want to do is where we need to start. And that's where we start over on the right-hand side of this, really, in the applied analytics space. I'd be suggesting to people, drop this data-driven language, right? You want to be value-driven, and you want data and analytics to inform that strategy. Don't let the data take over from where the value is, because otherwise you've got the tail wagging the dog, right? So if we can focus that in and push our analytics effort, push our engineering effort to make the analytics effort more efficient, make sure the governance is there to let the engineering piece sing, right? But really focus that that data analytics effort. How are we going to create value in a business? We'll deliver a hell of a lot more. And I think we'll finally start to see, you know, the promise of this area actually being able to come to life. So a kind of closing thought, and I think I'm reasonably on time, would just be, you know, if we're focusing on the area of marketing. I was talking to marketeers this morning, and I know not everybody here will be in that space, but we're all in the business of marketing, really, in a way, right? Because we're all trying to grow revenues in an organization, or if we're in a non-profit, we're trying to grow, you know, donations, or we're trying to grow something. You know, it's moving towards everything being data dependent, right? And again, I'm deliberately not saying data driven here, right? But data dependent. We need data moving at the pace it should be moving at, structured in the ways that we need to structure it in order to be able to keep the business running at the pace that we need to run it. So we need to start looking at analytics, data as a planning tool. And I think we're too caught up sometimes in using it to evaluate things that we've done in the past. And yes, of course, we take those learnings forward. But really what we've been trying to focus on here is, how are we going to identify future value for a business in the future? How are we going to capture it? And how are we going to use analytics as the tool to allow us to do that? So that kind of brings us to an end, Lorraine. I hope that's reasonably on brief and informative, and definitely open to any questions.
Yeah, that's great, Martin. Thanks. And I will just open it up to questions. So if people want to unmute themselves and ask a question, they can. I might just begin by just asking a quick question. I think what you focused on and what really resonated with me, and something that I would completely agree with, is the importance of the purpose of your analytics, because there's an awful lot of data there. We can do lots of fancy analysis and show how great we are, but if it's not actually doing something that's useful, and starting with, you know, what is the problem that we have, you know, what is it that we want to look into more deeply, I think that's really important, and you've made that really clear. Can I ask you though, do you find and maybe even throughout the years that you've been working in analytics, that people will have a skepticism to it. Like the example that you showed, for example, with the doctor and the cheese is an interesting one, that we can, if we look hard enough, we could find anything in data. And do you find that people are maybe somewhat skeptical to that?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes they're right to be, and sometimes they're not. And so, like, interesting conversation this morning with a class that, when I was a kid, and I don't know how long this goes back or how pervasive this is, but when I was a kid, we weren't allowed to sleep in a night with the light on in the bedroom, right? And the reason we weren't allowed to sleep with the light on in the bedroom at night was that there was a pervasive belief, and it was documented in medical journals, that kids who slept with the light on would grow up to be short-sighted, right? Or had a greater chance of growing up to be short-sighted. And that lasted for decades, that belief, until it was finally refuted when people started to understand genetics and realized that parents who were short-sighted were more likely to leave the light on in the room for the child. And as a result of that, or sorry, not as a result of that, rather, but the reason the child was growing up to be short-sighted was because the parents were short-sighted, and had nothing to do with the lights. And so we find correlations in data that are, that correlation is real, right? But it's not describing the cause. And I think where people are, should be genuinely skeptical is whenever we look at historical data, it's very, very difficult to assign causality to anything when you're looking backwards, right? So all we can do is say, look, there's a correlation there. And if we were to flip back, and we share the slides afterwards, flip back to the process that we put up, we didn't dwell on it, but at the end of that analytical process, all we have is a hypothesis, right? So we believe that if we were to do this, that result is going to change. And what we've got to do is set ourselves up to be able to approach that in an objective way and say, okay, we're going to find a way to test this between two different groups of people. We'll apply it to one of them and not to the other, and we'll see what the effect that it'll have is. A really nice example of this that I came across a few years ago was with, now I hope they don't mind me saying, was a guy was from Port Gosh, and he was talking about how they recognized from the data that their sales calls largely came in the evening, and they made a decision to only purchase, to take a media plan where they would only purchase out-of-home advertising that faced in towards urban areas, so that when people would see it on their commute home rather than on their way into work, right? So they believed that they could cut their media spend for out of home in half by only buying space where, where people would be driving out past on their way home. I would love to know whether that worked out or not, right? They were very happy with it, but they didn't split it, right? So they didn't, they found the correlation, they found the insight in the data that said this might be something, but that doesn't prove in any way whatsoever that acting on it like that is actually going to increase sales, or it won't negatively affect sales. So really you want to set yourself up to be able to prove it in the future, but we've got to be open-minded to say, we found this correlation, it's interesting, we think we should act on it. Let's figure out a way of proving it, and then we can scale it, which is easier for larger organizations to do than it is for smaller ones.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier on, there's a question, I'll come to it now in a second. You mentioned earlier on that, SMEs might not be using data, and they might not be, kind of getting the support for their decision making. Do you see that, I suppose, I'm thinking, are they at a disadvantage? Should there be kind of support there? We see kind of support for them, in terms of kind of from a technology perspective, but I suppose specifically to upskill in this area.
Yeah, I think so. So, it's a tough question, right? Because we're talking about SMEs, and, we're talking kind of companies about 10 to, well, depending on where you want to go to, right? So say 10 to 200. So it's very difficult for them, especially when we go back to that, do you find a person who can do all of this, right? Yeah. And you don't, right? So it's very difficult for them to resource that. But I think the basics, even, like, because we focused on some basic stuff today, right? We didn't try to talk about, predictive analytics, and we didn't try to talk about deep learning. We just focus in on those basics. And I'll use the example of my own brother-in-law, who runs a small business of about 12 people. And I was talking to him about this recently, and said, are there jobs you make money on and jobs you lose money on? As a subcontractor in a construction area. And he said, yeah, of course there is. Like, yeah, there's some jobs we break even, some jobs terrible. Like, I said, so when you get the request in, like, how do you decide what you're going to quote for or what you're not going to quote for? And he said, I just, I have, like, this, I have a feel for it. Yeah. Right. And he does, right? And he has that, like, you know, there's no doubt, like he has the heuristic. But I also have little doubt that if I was to sit down with him and we were to lay out all of the jobs that they've done for the last 5 years across the table and somehow try to code the data up, that we could definitely give him a decision-making matrix that would really help, right? And you know where it would probably help more than anything else would be that somebody else could then decide whether they were going to price a job or not for him. He wouldn't have to do it himself.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely something there about being able to provide even a base level skill set on how would I just structure that data in such a way that it will point me in the right direction. And this is all about making it a little bit better. Like I always saying to my own team, like our job is to help the business make better decisions, right? Not good decisions, right? Not perfect decisions, just better than whatever it was before. If it's already good, then a little bit more than good. If it's bad at the moment, then maybe just fair is okay, right? But we just need to improve it.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's a question here, I'll just read it here. Is there always a life cycle to using data? So early on, it's kind of little value.
I don't think that's universally true. And it depends on what, like, you know, kind of what do we mean by early on. But I think any piece of information, and I do draw a distinction between data and information, but any piece of information can be used in order to make a slightly better decision. I think where we get caught up a little bit, if you were to you know, kind of think this fully through and think about, you know, some of the new technologies that are out there now around marketing automation, where we're really able to like do things at a massive scale, right? Where, you know, we can have records for hundreds of thousands or millions of customers flowing through a system and knows exactly what to do with them, juggles them all up and automates a decision coming out the other side. That can only really happen. And again, like this is another area where I think the promise isn't fully being realized. Like that can only really happen after a lengthy exercise of figuring out what the best decisions to make are, what the types of decisions that should be allowable for different customers, and configuring it in a system. And, you know, all of this wonderful automation that's there is actually really, really hard to achieve. So, you know, you might say, you know, does that life cycle always exist, and does it ultimately get more valuable? It does, because it allows you to scale stuff like that as it matures.
Yeah.
But I would say it's as much the business maturing as it is the data. Now, I hope I've answered that, because I know there are data life cycles that you know we would talk about that exist in a different space. But I think that sounds like the context of the question.
Yeah, no, great. There's another question here, and we might leave this as the final one. Do you think that businesses want to analyze the data themselves because they don't understand the methods, and believe that you kind of need to understand the data to be able to interpret it?
Yes, I think that's why we have to bring those people together, and it's why I don't think that they, you know, and the starting point for me, you know, within this talk deliberately is, here's why the analytics side of this isn't living up to its part of the deal here, right? Just because they're off quite often. Give me the data, I'll go off and I'll find something, and exactly that. Like, you know, I could probably sit here and list off for another half hour all the times we found the most interesting stuff in the data that turned out to just be wrong, because it was you know, it was just something that a sales channel person could have told you in a second. You know, no, that doesn't work like that. You know, we actually typed the person's date of birth into that field, not the date they signed up. You know, it's stuff like that, right? But at the same time, I think it's so that's absolutely true. There are a couple of other motivations that sit in there as well, though, which are the ones we really want to kind of pick away at, right? And the other ones are, I know what I want to do, and therefore I'm just looking for the thing that helps me to back it up, right? That helps me to make that decision. Which, you know, as I would typically say anything like, if you've decided, fine. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm in the business of trying to help people who are open to it, right? I don't want to have one more business insight that isn't being acted on. Now I'll come back around to you at some point, right? And we'll have a little chat, but I'm not going to do it in the moment. So there is that element of I'm just looking for the thing that helps. I'm not looking for the questioning of what I want to do, because I have a plan and I already told my boss that I'd started. So, you know, but the other piece that's probably a little bit more kind of sinister that we come across from time to time is, I want to know the answer before anybody else does. Because I'm a little bit worried that we're looking at kind of stuff from history, and, you know, I think so. There's a real, again, all of those things come back to that same concept: openness and engagement, right? agreement and focus on, like, we're all actually trying to achieve the same thing. So I think sometimes when we start out, we have a sales, marketing, or channel owner who, to be fair, like, again, we'll always say this, like, it's easy for us sitting on the sideline who don't have those targets, right, to pontificate about what we should do, right, where that person is, their income or whatever it might be is actually dictated by whether the number at the end of the month is 49 or 51, right? They just want to get that number to be 51, whatever way they do it, right? And it's understandable. So we've got to get this way of bringing people together so that that's actually a shared goal, and just the clarity that the reason why we're saying let's focus on business value is that that's going to put us all aligned against that same target, and hopefully cut away some of that element of information is power, but the way that data becomes information is through the context of somebody's subject matter expertise. So if the data is sitting with one person and the subject matter expertise is sitting with another person, those two people aren't working together. Has its own conclusion.
Well, that's great, Martin. And again, thank you so much for that. It was a really, really interesting session. So yeah, I think we'll call it an end there to the questions. And thanks once again, and just again to the participants, that the Emerging Technology Seminar will run for, there'll be another 5 weeks of it, each Friday at 3 p.m. So we hope that you come along to some more. Thanks again, Martin. Take care.
Yes, thank you.